That's kind of where I, first put on the hat and said, do I like this? And happened to be something I was really interested in, and what we ended up spending most of our time on for many years was this idea of dual use, right? Of what are we looking at when we're looking at particularly advanced and emerging technologies? Obviously extends beyond that. It can extend to many different industries, but advanced emerging technologies. And how do we want to our regulate technologies that have inherently a dual use potential for military or civil use, but also not just how we regulate them, but how we want to promote them. Because that's one
Yep,
of the
absolutely.
interesting, again, tensions we see noting in the drone space, but there are others. I mentioned AI as well, where we are really coming up against this inherent tension that we have, where we clearly are identifying whether it be at the top level of, and I think this will be something would be interesting to see as the industry starts to build out, as the broader eVTOL industry builds out, broader advanced air mobility kind of takes on new shapes and forms, of what we are going to consider the national security risks in there versus, again, the dual use commercial
Yeah.
opportunities, right? Because from a regulatory perspective, there's two schools of thought on dual use and how you regulate it for export
Mm-hmm.
control purposes.
Mm-hmm.
One is the idea of small garden, high walls. So there you just identify the most critical technology. So it may not even be at a platform level. It may be that, okay, unless you're building this thing for, the Department of Defense or whoever it might be, unless that's what it is, and then yes, we're going to consider this type highly export controlled. Other than that, we're only going to pick out some extremely critical technologies, maybe advanced composite materials that are only developed for, a military aircraft because they control certain
Chipsets.
vibrations. Yeah,
Yeah,
certain chipsets are
absolutely.
designed for super high altitude or to nuclear
Absolutely.
hardened, radiation hardened. That's one
Perfect.
theory where you regulate those very strictly, only to be shared either with very close allies or perhaps not at all. Or the other theory is you have a very broad regulatory purview. And this is kind of historically how export controls have been applied on the dual use
Absolutely.
side, where you say,
It's
well,
nothing new. Yeah.
yeah, in theory, we regulate all these things. And then we have this very complicated set. And this is where I think for this industry, it's going to be very crucial to see how this plays out. This really complicated set, which ends up, giving great job opportunities for lawyers like me. But this
That's
super
true.
complicated export control regime where anything from a spark plug to a
Yes.
satellite can potentially be
Yes.
controlled, and then you have to
Yes.
spend potentially hours reading through complex
Yes.
regulations, working with the engineers to identify particular specifications, sourcing patterns, understanding has this been transformed in this country, has been incorporated or not incorporated, and that is another model. And typically, historically, industry perspectives across most industries, and I would say advanced air mobility would have the same perspective as most is they don't love that model
That's so true.
because of the uncertainty, not so much because they're worried that their specific products are going to be regulated all the time. It's the lack of certainty and the cost and the
Yes.
time required to do it. So that makes it very hard to establish your supply chains, know who you're dealing with, and then ultimately on your customer side, then understanding, oh God, this thing that I didn't think was export controlled, but because I incorporated this one thing that we think could be controlled or we're not sure, now maybe we can't sell it to our friends here. So that uncertainty has historically, in this context, been very challenging.